If you put in the indirects in law and accountancy, it implies 1.5 million. British manufacturing, in its present emaciated state, implies 2.4 million, and wholesale employment is, of course, concentrated in London, which is, as people in Manchester would say, one of the problems of the UK. And this brings me now to Ewald, because we're quickly going to rattle through this, to the second part of the story, which is not how the Distributive Coalition used the old story about finance, but about how the journalists struggled but didn't find a new story about what had gone on.
Thanks, Karel. This is the back half of the presentation. I will go briefly through the different slides. It's obvious that the narrative-producing animals are not only located within the Distributive Coalition, but also outside of this coalition, namely journalists, academics, and technocrats. I'm going to briefly basically summarize what kind of narratives have been produced by these different castes or tribes. First, the tribe of the journalists. You can distinguish between two different elements within this tribe. The first is the sort of high-end quality journalism. It's obvious if you look at the Financial Times that they have been just as surprised as all of us have been by the outbreak of the crisis and coming to grips with this crisis in installments. So there's a lot of wisdom involved in the actually reporting about the crisis, but it doesn't add up to a sort of coherent, consistent narrative. On the tabloid side of journalism, what we see is a focus very much on what could be called scumbag millionaires, the fat cats working at the banks who basically got scot-free out of the crisis. And that, of course, generates a huge amount of political energy, but actually didn't do much in terms of finding solutions, basically bonus caps, that's it. Then to the technocrats and the academics, what seems to be going on is basically knowledge failure. They didn't know shit and they didn't know what to do about it. Okay, thank you very much. They tried to recover their knowledge about what was going on, but at the end of the day, that basically seems to boil down to people being confronted with plumbing problems. So they're going to solve the different plumbing problems in the system, doing that by means of higher capital adequacy ratios, cutting off banks, slimming down banks, etc., etc. They don't have the political balls to do it themselves, but they do it by means of an EU commissionary. And within the academic sphere, it's very obvious that the reporting about the crisis is still very much dominated by mainstream economists who see it as an attempt and an invitation to revisit their main behavioral assumptions. So they seem to be replacing Homo economicus by more behavioral finance and behavioral economics type of approaches without changing very much. Okay, so what we end up with at the end of the day is no consistent or coherent alternative narrative, which we need in order to come up with a better solution to this big crisis. Not a timid solution, but an effective solution. So what we seem to be witnessing is actually political outcomes in which the good, bad old story that was depicted or presented earlier by Karel is still being replicated. The economic outcome is going to be the build-up probably of a new bubble with all the sort of implications that entails, which we have seen in 2007, 2009. And of course, this sort of indirect effect in terms of high public debts, which will need to be brought down over a period of, let's say 10 to 15 years. So how can we do better? In the report, we try to come up with an analysis of the crisis in which we focus on long, fragile change. It is within these long, fragile change that the main problems are to be found. Basically, that means that it's not banking as intermediary, it is banking as a transaction-generating machine, which has been constructing these long, fragile change, which consists of a large amount of links, which allow the possibility of generating fees. Here is an example. Witness the complexity. This is the US private label residential mortgage-backed security credit chain. It moves from the top left to the bottom left, and it moves from households to end investors, which are, of course, institutional investors. The crucial thing is that in each of these links there is a fee-earning possibility. The fee earning possibility is, of course, the flip side to costs for clients, both high-end investors at the bottom left side of the chain and residential households at the top left end of the chain. This is what happens with the fees that are being earned by large investment banks. It is distributed between bankers themselves and shareholders. So what do we need to do? We need to basically replace the bad, good stories that worked yesterday and that allow the political elite to replicate and reproduce the current, basically, business as usual. We need to replace that by new stories which follow the money, which try to trace these different fragile, long change, focus on the different fee-earning possibilities, and emphasize very much that there are costs connected to these fees being earned by investment banks. And that basically means that you need to demonstrate to your readers, to your audience, that what is actually seen to be a good retail product is at the end of the day ending up in wholesale markets after a lot of fees have been subtracted from this credit chain. If you want to know more about this particular argument, go to the alternative report on UK banking reform at this URL. Thank you very much.
Super.